The two negative votes, Israel and the United States. 1998, the vote, 154 to 2. The negative votes, Israel and the United States. Skipping a little to 2002, the vote, 160 to 4. The negative votes, Israel, the United States, joined by the powerhouses in the Pacific, the Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. 2003, the vote, 160 to 6. Well, 6, the number is growing. Israel, the United States, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, now joined by Palau and Uganda. 2004, the vote 161 to 7, and then skipping up to the recent years, 2008, 164 to 7, 2009, 164 to 7. This past year, a very close vote, 164 to 7. The 7 negative votes, Israel, the US, Australia, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, and Palau. Now some of you have that nervous smile on your face because you don't know what Nauru and Palau are, but you don't want anyone else to know that you don't know what they are. So I will cure you of your ignorance. Nauru and Palau, without in any way being disrespectful to them, just trying to speak with strict objectivity, their combined populations can fit in the empty floor space in this room. And that's really it. That's the vote every year. And it's useful to bear in mind that the Czech Republic votes every year with the majority. For all of their peculiar notions of hospitality, your Prime Minister ought to know that I'm with him on this one, and we both disagree with Palau and Nauru. So, to use the language of young people on this particular issue, Mr. Fisher, or he's the farmer, Mr. Fisher and I are on the same page. Or the language of my generation, we're on the same wavelengths. Though, to use the language of my generation, I kind of get bad vibes from it. Some people understand that, okay. Not only the Czech Republic votes consistently with the majority for the two-state settlement on the June 67 border in accordance with international law, but the Islamic State of Iran every year votes with the majority. The only two outliers, apart from the South Pacific powerhouses, are the United States and Israel. On a regional level, in March 2002, the Arab League, meeting in Beirut, it's already a while ago, it's 8 years ago, they put forth the Arab Peace Initiative. The Arab Peace Initiative echoed exactly the terms of the UN General Assembly resolution, a two-state settlement on the June 67 border and what they called a just resolution of the refugee question. The vote in the Arab League, I think there are some members in this room today, it was 22 to 0. That doesn't sound very close. That doesn't sound very controversial. 22 to 0. Then meeting that same year, the 57 members of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, all the Islamic states in the world, the crazy Muslims, they meet. And all 57 members, including Iran, they agree. They said as follows: they adopt the Arab Peace Initiative to resolve the issue of Palestine and the Middle East, and decide to use all possible means in order to explain and clarify the full implications of this initiative and win international support for its implementation. Well, clearly these Muslims are crazy. They say they support the initiative and they want to rally international support for its implementation. Iran is a member of the Organization of the Islamic Conference. That's still only part of the story, because the Arab Peace Initiative, which was then endorsed by the Organization of the Islamic Conference, it went one step beyond international law. It said, if Israel accepts these terms for ending the conflict, we will not just recognize Israel, which is its obligation under international law, but it said, and now I'm quoting from the document, it will establish normal relations with Israel. It will establish trade. It will establish tourism with Israel, normal economic relations with Israel. No states are obligated under international law to do so, but the Arab League and then the Muslims meeting at the Organization of the Islamic Conference, that's what they endorsed. In 2004, these issues came up before the highest judicial body in the world. So far, I've talked about the most representative political body in the world and the main regional bodies. But then there is the issue of the main judicial body in the world, the International Court of Justice. And the story goes something like this. Israel, as most of you know, is building a wall in the West Bank. And the United Nations General Assembly, it put a question to the International Court of Justice. And the question was this: can you tell us what are the legal implications and consequences of the wall that Israel is building in the West Bank? The International Court of Justice deliberated on this question, and as most of you probably know, they decided the wall was illegal, and the wall had to be dismantled, and Israel had to pay compensation for the damages due to the wall. But that was actually the least significant aspect of the International Court of Justice advisory opinion. Because before the court could decide whether or not the wall was illegal, they had to decide prior legal questions. So, for example, as we all know, any state has the right to build a wall along its own border. Just like anyone in this room, if you own a private house, you have the right to build a fence along the border of your property. Obviously, as a homeowner, you don't have any right to build a fence that goes around your neighbor's swimming pool and living room. That's just a fence that's gone too far. And so the International Court of Justice had to decide, where are Israel's borders? If the wall is being built along its border, Israel has the right. If the wall is being built on somebody else's property, Israel obviously does not have the right. So the first order of business for the court was to decide, what are Israel's borders, before they could decide if the wall was legal or not. Number two, this was a very strange wall that Israel was building. Israel said, we're building a wall to protect ourselves from terrorists. But the wall took this winding path that went around its settlements. Now, the court had to decide, are the settlements legal under international law? If they're legal, of course Israel has the right to build a wall around its settlements.